My name is Nate Calder, Recon Scout, long-range surveillance. The guy you send ahead when you can't afford to be seen. The jungle doesn't care what your job title is. It doesn't care if you're a veteran or a first-timer, if you're brave or terrified, if you've got a plan or a prayer. It takes everything you bring into it, your breath, your heat, your sound, and it either hides you or sells you out. That night, the jungle sold us out. We were two men moving through a green world that never slept. Me and Elliot Vance, my partner, my brother in everything except blood. We'd trained together, fought together, laughed at dumb jokes in places no one back home could point to on a map. We had a rhythm you couldn't teach. He read my silence. I read his shoulders. Our mission was called Glass River. The name sounded clean, almost harmless. It wasn't. A hostile force had taken control of an abandoned hydro facility deep in the interior, an old power station built decades ago, now swallowed by vines. Satellite images showed new structures around it. Temporary towers, camo netting, security rings, vehicles that didn't belong. Our intel said they weren't just using the facility as a base. They were preparing something. And if they finished, an entire valley of civilians and a forward operating line of our own troops could be cut off, flooded, or poisoned depending on what they did with the water system. One lever, one switch, one timed release, and the river would become a weapon. That's why we were inserted days ahead. We weren't there to fight a war. We were there to prevent one. We'd been moving for 6 hours, boots sinking into wet soil, shirts soaked through, every breath tasting like leaves and rust. The air was thick enough to chew. Even the insects felt heavier in this place. Elliot touched his earpiece, then shook his head. Still dead. Our comms had gone silent after we crossed the ridge, an expected blackout zone. We had a single window to transmit once we reached high ground near the station. Until then, it was just us. No updates. No help. He tried to grin. It's like the old days. I didn't laugh. My gut was tight. The jungle was too quiet for midnight. Then Elliot froze and lifted a fist. I stopped instantly. We listened. Not the normal jungle noise. No frogs. No distant birds. No chorus of insects. Just one sound. A faint mechanical tick, like metal tapping metal, patient and precise. A perimeter alarm. Elliot's eyes met mine. He mouthed a single word, trip. We backed up one step at a time, moving like we were made of glass. Elliot lowered his gaze and saw it, a thin line across the ground, almost invisible, tied to a crude trigger buried under leaves. He exhaled through his nose. Slow. Controlled. Who sets a tripwire this far out? He whispered. Someone who doesn't want surprises, I whispered back. He reached for his cutters. And then the jungle exploded. Not with an explosion, worse. With light. A flare popped high above the canopy, bathing the world in harsh white. Shadows snapped into shape. The green turned into a bright, accusing stage. Elliot's face flashed pale. And gunfire started, short bursts, disciplined, from multiple angles. We dove behind a fallen log. Bullets chewed bark into splinters. Dirt kicked into my eyes. Elliot fired back twice, controlled, saving rounds. They knew. He shouted over the noise. My mind raced. No patrol would be this tight. No random guards would coordinate this fast. This was a net, thrown with intention. We had two choices, freeze and get pinned, or move and risk stepping into something worse. Left. I yelled. We pushed left, low ground. Elliot nodded. We moved together, crawling, then sprinting between cover like we'd done 100 times. The jungle blurred into streaks of green and mud. My lungs burned. My gear slapped my ribs. Then there was a hard metallic snap under Elliot's boot. Not a click. A snap. His eyes widened. Mine, he started. I didn't think. I lunged, grabbed his vest, and yanked him backward. The blast punched the air where he'd been. Not a massive explosion, just enough to shred and maim. Leaves and shrapnel ripped through the space, slicing the log behind us like a saw. Elliot hit the ground hard. He sucked in air. I grabbed his shoulder. You hit. He shook his head, jaw clenched. No, no. You got me. Then a second shot cracked. Clean, sharp, close. Elliot's body jerked. His eyes went blank for a fraction of a second, like he couldn't understand what just happened. He looked down at his chest. A dark bloom spread across his fabric, and the jungle sound returned, faintly, like the world resumed once it had taken what it wanted. Elliot collapsed into me. No. I breathed, and the word came out as vapor, useless. I pressed my hand against the wound, like pressure could argue with physics, like my palm could negotiate with fate. Elliot's lips moved. He didn't have much air left. Nate, he whispered. Stay with me. Stay with me. His eyes found mine, and even then, he tried to smile. Finish it, he said. Don't let them. His breath rattled. Promise me. The flare overhead began to dim. Shadows stretched again. The firing eased, like the enemy was waiting to see if the trap had worked. My throat tightened until it hurt. I promise, I said. Elliot's hand gripped my sleeve once, weakly. Then his fingers went slack. And I was alone. For a second I didn't move. Not because I didn't want to. Because my body had forgotten how. I felt the weight of his head against my shoulder and the impossible silence inside myself where anger should have been. Then the jungle reminded me it was still there. Footsteps, approaching, cautious. Voices, low, controlled, speaking a language I didn't recognize but understood in tone. Close in, finish, collect. I dragged Elliot's body behind the log and swallowed the urge to scream. I removed his ID patch and tucked it into my pouch without looking at it. I took his spare batteries, his last water pack, his map card, the tiny satellite burst unit we'd planned to use. I didn't take his weapon. Not because I didn't need it. Because leaving it felt like leaving a piece of him that still had purpose. I slid into the undergrowth and became a shadow. I moved on hands and knees through mud that wanted to suck my boots off. I didn't run. Running is noise, and noise is a beacon. I listened. I watched. I let the enemy pass within 10 feet of me. 3 silhouettes, rifles low but ready, scanning where the flare had lit the scene. One of them paused near Elliot's blood trail, crouched, touched the ground, and raised fingers to his nose. Then he smiled. He whispered something to his teammates and pointed deeper into the jungle, my direction. They didn't know where I was, but they knew I was alone, and they knew what fear did to lonely men. They started hunting. I forced my breathing into a slow pattern and moved in a wide arc away from the trail toward higher ground. The station was still ahead, 2 kilometers, maybe 3 in this terrain. Too far for a man carrying grief like a backpack full of stones. But I didn't have a choice. Glass River wasn't about me. It was about the villages downstream. The families sleeping near the water. The soldiers holding a line they couldn't retreat from if the river turned hostile. If I failed, the headlines would use words like tragic and unexpected. The truth would be simpler. One scout stopped moving, and people died because of it. The jungle thickened as I climbed. Vines wrapped around trunks like veins. The humidity became a living thing pressing against my face. My boots squelched in mud. I tested every step with a stick before committing weight. Tripwires were invisible until they weren't. Every few minutes, I heard them behind me. Never close enough to see, never far enough to forget. They were patient. That was the worst part. An impatient enemy fires wildly. A patient enemy waits for you to get tired. I reached a shallow ravine and paused under a root system that formed a natural ceiling. I pulled out Elliot's map card and checked the route. We'd marked 3 observation points. Point 1 was now a grave. Point 2 was a ridge overlooking the hydro station. From there we could confirm what they were building. Point 3 was the transmission window. A bare rock face high enough to punch a satellite burst through the canopy for a few seconds. If I could reach point 2 and confirm what they were doing, I could decide the only thing that mattered. Was this sabotage? A flood? Or something worse? I swallowed, tasted iron in my mouth from biting my own cheek. Then I heard a new sound. Not footsteps. A low, distant thrum, like a generator under strain. The station was active. That meant their plan was close. I moved again. As dawn approached, the jungle shifted color from black to bruised purple, then to a dull green. The mist rose in sheets. Everything glistened. Somewhere a monkey screamed like a warning. I reached the ridge at point 2 and crawled to the edge. And finally I saw it. The hydro station sat in a bowl of land, half-collapsed concrete structures covered in moss. But new construction had risen around it. Temporary scaffolding, antenna masts, floodlights, patrol paths cut into the jungle like scars. And in the center, near the river intake, was a long metal container with hazard markings, fresh paint, clean edges. Not a fuel tank, not a generator. A sealed chemical transfer unit. My stomach tightened. They weren't trying to blow the dam. They were going to contaminate the river, quietly, efficiently, in a way that would look like an industrial accident until it was too late. Downstream villages wouldn't know until people started collapsing. Our troops wouldn't know until their supply of water turned lethal. And because it was water, it would spread without firing a shot. I scanned with my optics. Guards in coordinated patrol patterns. Not militia. Professionals. Their gear was mixed, some modern, some improvised, like a force assembled from different places under one command. Then I saw the real problem. A portable command unit near the antenna mast, laptops, signal boosters, a dish angled toward the sky. They weren't just poisoning water. They were broadcasting something, or coordinating an extraction once the release began. I needed to warn command. But my comms were dead under the canopy. I needed point 3, the transmission window. And between me and point 3 was a kilometer of jungle full of hunters who knew I was in the area. I backed away from the ridge and forced myself to think like Elliot would have wanted, cold, tactical, focused. I had 3 assets. Elliot's burst transmitter, a single smoke flare, my ability to stay unseen. I also had one advantage the enemy didn't expect. They thought I'd run. They thought I'd be panicked. They didn't know I was the kind of man who got calm when the world broke. I moved toward point 3, but not directly. I circled downwind, using the river's noise as cover when possible. I crossed a shallow stream to break scent, then climbed again toward the rock face. Halfway up, a shadow moved ahead. I froze. A man stood on the trail, rifle slung, scanning, one of the hunters. He wasn't moving like a patrol. He was moving like a fisherman waiting for a bite. They were setting ambush points. He didn't see me. I could backtrack, lose time I didn't have, or remove the obstacle and risk noise. I chose a third option. I pulled a small reflective strip from my kit, tied it to a vine, and flicked it into a gap where dawn light could catch. It shimmered, just enough to look like motion. The hunter's head snapped toward it. He stepped off the trail, cautious, moving toward the flicker. I slid past him in the opposite direction, silent as guilt. My heart hammered, but my hands were steady. At the rock face, point 3, the canopy thinned. The stone rose like a spine from the jungle, bare enough to offer a tiny window of sky. Tiny was enough. I unpacked the burst unit, connected the battery, and aligned the antenna like Elliot had taught me. Quick, precise, no wasted movement. The unit had to transmit for 5 seconds. That was all. Then it had to disappear. I hit power. A small light blinked. 1 second. 2. 3. A twig snapped behind me. I turned, weapon up, body low. 2 hunters stepped into view, silent, close, rifles raised. They'd followed me after all. My mind went razor sharp. I couldn't fight both and still send the message. But the unit was already transmitting. I needed time. I did the one thing that felt insane. I didn't shoot. I threw the smoke flare. It erupted into thick gray, swallowing the space between us. The hunters fired through the smoke, controlled bursts. Bark shredded. Stone chipped. I dropped flat and rolled behind a boulder. The burst unit blinked rapidly. For seconds, I heard footsteps pushing through the smoke. 5 seconds. The unit clicked, Transmission complete. I yanked it free, stuffed it into my pouch, and moved. The hunters were close now. One lunged through the smoke, silhouette sharp, rifle swinging. I struck his weapon aside and drove my shoulder into his chest, sending him back into the haze. The other fired. The shot cracked the stone near my head. I ran, not downhill, not away, sideways along the rock face where the ground was uneven and treacherous. I knew they'd hesitate to sprint in unknown terrain. My lungs burned as if the jungle had poured fire into them. My legs trembled. My mind kept flashing Elliot's face, then shoving it down because grief was a luxury I couldn't afford mid-mission. Behind me, the hunters regrouped. I could hear their voices now, angry, clipped. They were no longer patient. That meant my message mattered. I slid down a muddy slope, scraped my arm on rock, and landed in a shallow ditch full of wet leaves. I stayed still, breathing through my nose, listening. Silence. Then, faintly, my earpiece crackled. A whisper of life. Calder, a voice said. Calder, this is Overwatch. Repeat, this is Overwatch. Do you copy? My chest tightened. I wanted to answer like a man, like a professional. Instead, my voice shook. Overwatch, I copy. Your burst came through. We have partial. Say again, confirm threat. I swallowed. They have a chemical transfer unit at the hydro intake. They're prepping contamination. Release window unknown, but soon. They also have comms gear, coordinating. A pause, then, understood. Strike team en route. Time to target is. Static cut the rest. The comms died again. But it didn't matter. The message was out. Now I just had to survive long enough to guide the strike. I moved to a new position overlooking the station, lower than point 2, closer, with a clear line of sight on the intake. I found a hollow beneath roots and settled in, weapon aimed, optics steady. Minutes passed like hours. Then the station lights changed, brightened. Movement increased. Guards took tighter positions. They were about to begin. I watched a tech team approach the chemical unit. They handled it carefully, like it was sacred. One of them held a tablet. I could see the countdown reflected faintly on the screen, even from distance. 10 minutes. They were that close. My radio crackled, briefly. Calder, mark targets, if able. I couldn't transmit. The jungle swallowed me again. So I did what scouts have done forever. I became the eyes. I watched patterns. I memorized faces. I counted vehicles. I tracked who gave orders and who followed them. And I noticed something that made my blood run colder. A man near the command unit wasn't wearing mixed gear. His equipment was clean, uniform, high grade. He wasn't a local operator. He was the conductor. He moved to the intake and spoke to the tech team. They nodded quickly. Then he looked up, directly toward the jungle. Toward me. My body went still. He couldn't see me, but he knew where to look. Like he knew scouts. Like he'd been one. He raised his hand and made a small gesture. 3 guards broke formation and began moving into the jungle, toward my sector. They were sweeping, and the countdown was still running. I had a choice, stay and risk being found, or move and risk losing the only position that mattered. I thought of Elliot's last words, finish it. I stayed. I shifted deeper into the root hollow and adjusted my angle. If they came close, I'd have to act, quietly. The sweep team moved with discipline, checking ground for signs, scanning low foliage. One of them paused near a tree with my boot print faint in the mud. He crouched. My finger tightened on the trigger. He lifted a hand. 2 others angled toward the tree. They were close now. 20 meters. 15. I watched the leader's eyes scan the root system. He spotted a disturbed leaf. A tiny sign. His rifle rose. And then the sky itself changed. A distant, rolling thunder, not natural. Rotor blades. The strike team. The enemy heard it too. The sweep team froze, heads lifting. The conductor near the intake snapped his head toward the sky. For half a second, the entire station hesitated, caught between plan and survival. That half-second saved lives. The sweep team turned away from my position to look up. I moved. Silent. Fast. I slid out of the hollow and circled behind them, becoming the shadow they'd almost found. At the ridge, I saw the first helicopter silhouette crest above the canopy line, low, aggressive, not lingering. The enemy snapped into action. They rushed to the chemical unit, trying to trigger release early. No time. I raised my rifle and took a single careful shot, not at a person, but at the control box on the unit. The round struck metal. Sparks flew. The tech flinched back. The unit's status light blinked red. The release stalled. The conductor shouted, furious. And then the strike hit. Not a loud cinematic assault, something sharper. Precision. Flashbangs. Smoke. Teams moving like a single organism. The enemy's formation broke under pressure. I stayed on the ridge, marking movements, tracking the conductor as he attempted to flee toward the river path. He ran like a man who knew exactly where not to step. Like he'd mapped the ground. He was headed for a hidden extraction route. If he escaped, this wouldn't end here. He'd carry the blueprint to the next river, the next valley, the next quiet catastrophe. I moved. My legs screamed. My lungs felt like paper. But adrenaline is a liar. It tells you you're stronger than you are, right until you collapse. I cut through brush and intercepted the river path near a fallen tree. I took position behind it, weapon ready. The conductor appeared moments later, sprinting, breathing hard, eyes scanning. He saw me. We stared at each other through humid air and drifting smoke. He didn't raise his rifle. He smiled. "You're alone," he said, calm as a man ordering coffee. I kept my weapon trained. "So were you just now." He tilted his head. "Your partner." The words hit like a blade. My jaw tightened. I didn't answer. He took a slow step forward. "You did well. But you can't stop the river forever. Watch me." He sighed, almost bored. "There will be another plan. Another place. Another window." I saw it then. The way his fingers shifted, the slight angle of his shoulder. He was going to draw. I fired, not to kill, but to stop. The shot struck his gear pack, ripping it. He stumbled, shocked. He fell to one knee. The smile vanished. Behind him, strike team operators emerged through the trees, weapons ready, calling commands. The conductor looked from them to me. For the first time, he looked uncertain. They took him alive. They secured the chemical unit. They neutralized the command gear. They prevented the river from becoming a weapon. As the sun rose higher, burning mist away, the jungle began to sound normal again. Birds returning, insects humming, life pretending it had never held its breath. I stood by the river path, shaking now that it was safe to shake. An operator approached, helmeted, calm. "Calder." I nodded. "You're the scout." I didn't like the title. It felt too small for the weight I'd carried through the night. He looked past me into the jungle, toward where Elliot had fallen. He seemed to understand without me speaking. "Your partner saved a lot of people," he said quietly. I swallowed hard. He didn't get to see it. The operator placed a hand on my shoulder, brief, respectful, and then looked away, giving me space to breathe. I walked back into the jungle. I found the place where Elliot had died. The flare was gone. The blood had soaked into the earth like the jungle's payment. I knelt and touched the ground, not because it did anything, but because my body needed a gesture to hold on to. "I finished it," I whispered. I kept the promise. The jungle didn't answer. It never does. But somewhere downstream, people would wake up and drink water that didn't kill them. Children would run along the river. Soldiers would hold their line without realizing a catastrophe had almost rewritten their day. No one would know Elliot's name. No one would know how close the valley came to dying quietly. That's the curse of recon. If you do it right, the world stays ordinary. I stood up, wiped my face with the back of my hand, and started walking toward extraction. Each step felt like a debt, but I'd pay it. Because that's what Elliot asked. And because in the jungle, when you're left alone, you learn the only truth that matters. The mission doesn't care how you feel, but people live or die depending on what you do next. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Epic Recon Stories. Here we tell the missions that never made the headlines, the decisions made in silence, and the people who carried them. More stories are coming soon.